Welcome to the Phoenix Books presentation of Senator Elizabeth Warren and her new book, Fighting Chance. I had lengthy comments, but I'm going to save them. Welcome. We're really happy to see you here. I want to acknowledge the invaluable assistance of the Unitarian Universalist Society, the first Unitarian Universalist Society, without whom this event wouldn't have happened, because they really stepped up and helped us out a lot, and I'm incredibly grateful to them for doing this. I described it to Mara as event saving. I'd like to introduce the minister for the Unitarian Church. Mara is going to just welcome everybody officially.
Thank you, Mike. I'm honored to serve as senior minister here at the UU Society, and it is such a joy to welcome each and every one of you to our historic meeting house here at the top of Church Street. We here are humbled and honored to be stewards of this gathering place for our community, where we can talk about books and ideas and have discourse. So thank you all for being here this afternoon. It's a wonderfully full house. Thank you, Mike.
Elizabeth Warren is the senior senator from Massachusetts. She has worked as a Harvard Law School professor. She's the author of 9 books, and probably most importantly for those of us here in Vermont, has been credited with the idea for creating the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And the editorial comment for me is when a certain party would not allow her to serve as its first director, they sent her home to Massachusetts, where she defeated a Republican senator in order to become for which we are all grateful. Thank you very much for that. She is a mother of 2, a grandmother of 3, and now a fighter, tooth and nail for the middle class, from the bully pulpit of the U.S. Senate. And I am delighted to welcome U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren to Burlington, Vermont.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Whoa, good to see you. What fun to see you. Sit down. It's good to see all of you here. I am delighted to be here. I want to thank Mike for the introduction. I also want to thank the Reverend Dowdell for hosting us here. I very much appreciate it. You know, this is a great way to be in the church today. So thank you. Thank you, thank you. It's a wonderful space. So I'm delighted to be here. I thought what we do is that, first I want to check. Can everybody hear me in the back? Louder. I'll move that up. I never have a problem with not being loud enough. Okay. Now can you hear me in the back? Is that better? Worse? Make sure we can hear. We don't want to do that thing, because I like to keep my hands free. Better? If I speak up? Okay, I'll make sure I do that. It's important to me to be able to see everybody in the back row and in the balcony. I am a teacher. I know why you are in the back row. I am deeply suspicious. I will be calling on you at various points during this, just to make sure you're all awake. Okay. I thought what we'd do today is that I would talk a little bit about the book, read to you a little bit from the book, and then take as many questions as we have time for. And we'd try to do that, so I get a chance to hear what you're thinking about, and you can pin me down on the things that I think about. This is a book that starts with my own story. So just to set the stage for you, I was the late-in-life baby, as they used to be called back in those days. Oh, yes, you were too, weren't you? Yes, the late-in-life baby. My 3 brothers are much older than I am, and my mother always referred to me as the surprise. I was about 30 before it hit me what that meant. So, and the book opens when I was 12 years old. Now, by this point, my family had a lot of, like a lot of families, we'd had a lot of financial ups and downs. All three of my brothers were off serving in the military, so I was the only one still at home. And my daddy, at this point, was selling carpeting. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and my dad had a heart attack. And it was a really tough time for our family. He was home for a long time, and the bills piled up. We lost the family station wagon. We had our toes on the edge of losing our home when my mom decided that she would pull her best dress out of the closet, blow her nose, zip up her dress, put on her high heels, and walk over to the Sears, where she got a minimum wage job. And that's how we held on to our house. The three of us bumped along for a while, but there was no money for college. I ended up getting married at 19, had babies early, went to a commuter college, ended up graduating from a commuter college, and a commuter college that cost $50 a semester. Yeah, remember those days. We're going to talk about that. Then, when my first child, my daughter Amelia, was 2 years old, I hauled off and did something that was just totally crazy. I was first in the family to graduate from college. I decided to go to law school. And this was a real adventure, going to law school. But one of the best parts about going to law school is that Amelia and I were buddies. We got up every day and we put on our backpacks, and I would drop her off at daycare, and then I would go into school, and then I'd come back and pick her up. And we would tell these stories about our adventures every day. She would talk about the little boy who smeared chocolate pudding in his hair. And law school wasn't quite that much fun, but I would talk, this is no joke, I would talk about the professor who called on the coat hanging in the back of the room. It's a true story, and got really irritated when there was no response. So we would laugh hysterically, and that's where I thought I would start reading about the book. So here we go. One morning, when Amelia was little, probably about 3 at this time, she was sitting in a booster chair at the kitchen table eating cereal. I popped a few pieces of bread into the toaster oven, got busy doing 6 other things, and quickly forgot about the toast. When I saw smoke pouring out of the toaster oven, I grabbed the handle, pulled on the tray, exposing 4 slices of bread that were on fire. Not smoking, they were flaming at this point. Always a quick thinker, I screamed. And I threw the tray at the kitchen sink. Now, 3 pieces of toast hit the target, but the 4th went high, setting the cute little yellow curtains on fire. I screamed again. Then I grabbed Amelia's cereal bowl, threw it at the burning curtains. The milk doused most of the fire, and I calmed down enough to realize that throwing things was probably not my best strategy. Then I noticed that the toaster itself was shooting sparks and seemed to be on fire. I really wondered how long that thing had been on. So I got a glass, filled it with water, took a deep breath, and poured the water on the curtains. Yes. I then grabbed a towel, beat on the toaster until everything seemed quiet. It cooled down, and I unplugged it. That may have been the year that I started so many kitchen fires that Daddy gave me a fire extinguisher for Christmas. It was good in our family. Back then, the toaster had an on-off switch, and that was it. On was on, which meant that it was possible to leave toast under the little broiler all day and all night until the food burned, the wiring melted, and the whole thing burst into flames. At some point, and I have no idea exactly when, someone had the idea of adding a timer and an automatic shutoff. This simple change made it a whole lot harder for distracted mothers or anyone else to leave the broiler running until it set the kitchen on fire. 30 years later, while working on an article about how the government could protect consumers from predatory financial companies, do you love this transition? 30 years later, I thought about those old toaster ovens. By then, it was all but impossible to buy a toaster that had a 1 in 5 chance of bursting into flames and burning down your house. But by the 2000s, it was possible to refinance a home with a mortgage that had a 1 in 5 chance of costing a family their home and putting them out on the street. In fact, it wasn't just possible. Those mortgages were bursting into flames all over the country. Why the difference? The United States government was the difference. By 2007, the year I was writing this particular article, a government agency actually monitored toasters for basic safety. And if anyone tried to sell a toaster that burst into flames, the agency would put a stop to it. In fact, government agencies ensured the basic safety of pretty much every product offered for sale. The agencies worked to keep us safe. No lead paint in children's toys, no medicine laced with rat poison, no cars without functioning brakes, and no exploding toasters. But in 2007, there was no government agency that would stop the sale of exploding mortgages. So I tell a lot of stories in this book. I tell a lot of personal stories about growing up, about being a young mother, about starting a career. But I do this because I think of the thread of my story as the thread of America's story. I am the daughter of a maintenance man. That's how my dad ended up. And I made it to the United States Senate. America's truly a great country. But I made it to the United States Senate. I worked hard, but I grew up in an America that was investing in kids like me. It had started after the Great Depression. America decided they'd had enough of the boom and bust cycle that had hit roughly about every 15 years from the 1790s forward, and that we could do something about it to make this country safer for all of us. And so we did two quite remarkable things as a country. The first one, bless you, the first one was that we put strong rules in place to help level the playing field, to help make sure that markets really work. The basic idea was to put a cop on the beat. It was to make sure that no one would steal your purse on Main Street or your pension on Wall Street. That was the idea behind it. And eventually, we kept working on those notions about safety in the marketplaces. We worried about safe medicines, safe drinking water, and eventually, as I said, safe toasters. That was the first step. The second step is that America built a future for its kids. And it did that by making investments. Investments in education, so kids could have better jobs. Investment in basic infrastructure, in roads and bridges and power grids. Because we didn't know what the next little business was going to be that would make it big, but we were pretty sure they were going to need power. They were going to need roads to be able to get their goods to market. So we all made those investments so those businesses could get started, whoever was ready to work hard could do it, and build something terrific. And we made a third kind of an investment, a really remarkable investment. We invested as a country in basic research, in scientific research, in medical research, in engineering research, in chemical research. Why? This was what made us extraordinary. We believed that if we built a giant pipeline of ideas, that our children would have opportunities that we could only dream of, and that their children would have even more. We made those investments, and they worked. For half a century, if you just look at the numbers, what happened in America is that GDP went up, and at the same time, the middle family, the median family income, went up right along with it. In other words, as our country got richer, our families got richer. As our families got richer, our country got richer. We built opportunity. We built a future. And then, a little over 30 years ago, the Republicans came forward with a very different idea. They said, no, we can build wealth in a different way. And their first proposal, take the cops off the beat. Not off Main Street, off Wall Street. They said, let the big banks load up on risks. Let them paint a bullseye on the backsides of every American family. Make the word deregulation the mantra of the day. Take the regulators off their job. And the second, cut taxes for those at the top. Open up huge tax loopholes for big corporations. Open up tax loopholes for millionaires and billionaires. And how were we going to pay for that? By cutting the investments. Cut the investments in education, in infrastructure, and in basic research. The result? Banks and other big corporations made huge profits. Billionaires kept more of their money. In other words, the rich got richer and the powerful got more powerful. Meanwhile, the middle class began to crumble, the economy collapsed, and we may be the first generation in American history to see our children do worse than we did. So, by 2009, right after the crash, I was down in Washington, and I was fighting hard for two things simultaneously. The first one was to try to get some accountability into the TARP bailout process. The second was fighting to try to get a consumer agency. Now, I was still thinking about those toasters, and my thinking on this was we didn't need a single law to be passed, because banks figure out how to innovate over time, how to fence posts out on the prairie, how to run around them over time. What we needed, in my view, was we needed an agency that would be there, just like the Food and Drug Administration, to level the playing field, so everybody could see what the products were. So you didn't make your profits by cheating people, by tricking people, by trapping people. So I wanted this consumer agency, and I wanted it to be part of the Dodd-Frank bill, what became Dodd-Frank, moving forward on financial regulation. Now, I thought it was a great idea. The banks hated it. I know you're shocked by that, but they hated it. In fact, by 2009, they were spending more than $1 million a day on just the lobbying, not the political contributions and every other part of this. $1 million a day, they did that for over a year. $1 million a day just to slow down financial reform, and their number one target, kill off the consumer agency. Whatever else happens, we can't let the consumer agency go through. So, I'm going to pick the story up again, and here's where the story picks up. The Democrats had control, you remember, of both the House and the Senate in 2009, after they'd taken over. And so, the financial reforms had made it through the House, and the consumer agency was in the financial reforms. Now it goes over to the Senate, and it's in the Senate Banking Committee, and the question is, what will the Banking Committee report out that will go to a vote on the floor of the United States Senate? The bill was stuck in the Senate, and of course, people like me, I'm fighting to get the consumer agency in. The banks are fighting to make sure that it stays out. So that's where I picked the story up again. It was Friday morning, January 15th, 2010, and the calls started coming in early. I was at home, up early to work out on the treadmill in the basement, and I was still huffing and puffing when the phone rang for the first time. Had I seen this morning's Wall Street Journal, the rumors were flying on Capitol Hill. The consumer agency wasn't going to make it. In an effort to move the larger financial reform bill forward, Senator Dodd would trade it off. There might be some face-saving attempt to set up a new consumer protection department somewhere else in government, but there would be no strong, independent agency with the authority to get much of anything done. The insiders on our side sent the word out. Too bad, so sorry. It was a good idea. But unless the agency was dropped from the reform bill, the whole package of legislation would fail. So, better to toss the consumer agency overboard and get the other reforms through. I listened. So this was it. The consumer agency was dead. All the families who'd been cheated by the big banks and the credit card companies. All the hard work by Barney, the consumer groups, Heather, Dan, the president, all that knocking on doors and all those meetings. And now it was coming to an end. So I asked if there would be a vote, even a losing vote, but the answer was no. The death wouldn't be a public execution. Instead, the Senate Banking Committee would propose a financial reform bill with no consumer agency. No one in the Senate, not a single Democrat or a single Republican, would ever have to vote against the agency. Instead, it would just be suffocated quietly in its crib. No one would ever know exactly who killed it or why. So I asked my last question. When? How long before the locked-in version of the bill would be introduced in the Senate Banking Committee? Best estimate, 3 weeks. The deal on other points wasn't finalized yet, and there were still a lot of moving parts that needed to be worked out. So I called Dan. Now, Dan is my former student, and by this time he's my wingman down in Washington. I called Dan and I said, we've got 3 weeks. Because the way I saw it, he had nothing to lose. I didn't want a job in the Capitol, so what did I care if I ticked off a lot of people in Washington? This was our last chance to get this agency into law. If we lost now, we lost forever. We had very little information about what had led to the latest assault on the agency, but we did know one thing. The Senate did not want a tough vote on this issue. Dan explained what that meant. The consumer agency was popular, and to a lot of senators, a vote on the new agency meant having to choose between angering the public and angering the banks. They don't want to anger either one. So they just preferred a quiet and slightly mysterious death for the consumer agency. So I figured, too bad. Too damn bad. If a bunch of senators were going to pick the banks over the families, then the American public had a right to know. And if we didn't win, at least we could make one hell of a stink. And that's where the book goes from there. So here's how I see it. Washington works for those who can hire armies of lobbyists and lawyers. It doesn't work so well for everyone else. I saw it up close and personal with the big banks. They cheated American families, crashed the economy, got bailed out, and now the big five banks are 38% bigger than they were when they were declared too big to fail back in 2008. Think about that. They still swagger through Washington, blocking reforms and pushing around agencies. A kid gets caught with a few ounces of pot and goes to jail, but a big bank breaks the law, laundering drug money for years, and no one even gets arrested. The game is rigged, and it's not right. But it isn't just the big banks. Look at the choices the federal government makes. Our college kids are getting crushed by student loan debt. We need to rebuild our roads and our bridges and our power grids. We need more investment in medical research and scientific research. But instead of building a future, this country is bleeding billions of dollars in tax loopholes that go to profitable companies, Fortune 500 companies that pay nothing in taxes, billionaires who get so many tax loopholes that they pay taxes at a lower rate than their secretaries. But you know what they've got? They've got those lobbyists. They've got armies of lobbyists and lawyers and plenty of money to throw around in Washington. The game is rigged. The rich and the powerful can make sure the rules get written their way, but everyone else, not so much. So, we can whine about this, we can whimper about this, or we can fight back. Me, I'm fighting back. That's why I wrote this book. It's why I wrote this book. It's why I ran for the United States Senate. It's why I get out and talk to people every chance I get. So I want to say two things about this. The first one is change is hard. I get that. People can say, oh, but we try so hard. Yeah, change is hard. Change is hard, but we can win. That little consumer agency that I talk about in this story, just remember, we got that thing passed into law, and we did that because people wanted it passed into law, not because the big banks wanted it passed into law. We did it, and we did it together. Yes, we did. And I should say about that, before you have this moment of reflection where you say, I cannot believe I am so nerdy that I was just applauding the implementation of a new consumer agency, the thing has actually done something. I just got an email from one of my friends who's still over at the consumer agency. It has now passed the $4 billion mark in how much money it has forced the large financial institutions to return to customers they cheated. That's not bad in just a couple of years. Not bad. Not bad. So that's point number one. We can win. We have won before. We know how to do this. But the second point is to say, I'm not turning this country over to the rich and the powerful to run it for them at the expense of our children. The way I see this is a moment in history. People talk about gridlock in Washington. No, that's not what this is about. What this is about is fighting for a basic principle of how we build a future. Do we build a future by saying to those who have money and power, just keep some more of it and hope it will trickle down to everybody else? Or do we say that we build a future, we build a real future by saying everybody pays a fair share, and then we build those opportunities, not just for some of our kids, but for all of our kids. We do it by building in education. We do it by creating the infrastructure. We do it by making the investments in research. We do it because we believe that we can build something better, we can build something stronger. For me, this really is personal. You know, I told you about the story at the beginning. My mother went out and got a minimum wage job. She was 50 years old when she got her first job. Think about that. Pulled on her best dress, got a minimum wage job, but she did it in the 1960s when a minimum wage job would keep a family of 3 afloat. That was America's investment in working people, a minimum wage that actually supported them when they got out and worked. We've lost that. It's personal for me that I could go to a commuter college that costs $50 a semester. How could it cost $50 a semester? It cost $50 a semester because taxpayers said we're going to make those investments so that any kid, even the kid of a janitor, will have a chance. If she works hard, if she plays by the rules, if she's willing to get out there and try, she can get an education because we believed in investing in those kids. So I just want to say about this book. I wrote this book out of gratitude. I wrote it out of gratitude to my mother and dad, who worked so hard all their lives and ended up without much except the knowledge that all 4 of their children would do better than they did. And as my daddy said, he died a rich man. I wrote this book out of gratitude to an America that believed in building opportunity. And I wrote this book out of a determination that we will be that America again. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Do that. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. 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 Okay, let's do some questions. Thank you. Let's do some questions. I'll take consumer protection for 200, Alex.
The first question is, how would you prevent recent financial crisis from happening again?
Okay. Well, the first thing, we got to break up these big banks. I mean, we just have to. You heard what I was talking about in here. So what we've got now is the largest financial institutions, as I said, are 38% bigger than they were when they were too big to fail in 2008. Think about that. And remember in 2008, I mean, let's understand what really went wrong. They got big, and part of how they got big was by doing the financing around really lousy mortgages. This economy was broken one lousy mortgage at a time. And those guys figured out how to make a huge profit off that. They were selling grenades with the pins already pulled out and selling them in big packages and little packages. They ended up in your retirement account and your all over this economy. The consumer agency, in effect, cuts off how they get to the consumers to do that same thing. Not perfectly, but we're headed there, doing a lot better job. So what are the largest financial institutions? Just the big ones. This is not about community banks. This is not about credit unions. It's the biggest boys. What are they up to now? Well, they're out there trying to corner the market in aluminum. That's with your savings accounts, the money in your checking accounts. They're speculating in oil tankers. They are doing non-banking, high-risk activities at the same time that they're taking insured deposits. Does anyone want to guess how that movie turns out? So I've got a bill pending right now that is a 21st century Glass-Steagall. I have terrific co-sponsors on this. John McCain. You ready for that? Woohoo! I saw your face over that. Yeah. John McCain, Maria Cantwell from Washington, Angus King from Maine, so we've got an independent on this. We've got some other folks working on it. So the idea is just to say we got to separate this out. Are there other things we can do as well? You bet. We should talk about raising capital standards and so on. But the key thing, and here's the key, it's that we have to decide as a country, who does the government really work for? Does it work for the largest financial institutions? And the job of the regulators, the job of the United States government is to say, how can your profits go up every quarter? How can your CEO bonuses go up every year? Or is it the job to say, wait a minute, we're here on behalf of the American people to make sure that we have a banking system that is safe and secure and that families have a way to build wealth. I think this is the choice. This is the choice in Washington right now. This is one more version of the fight we've got. And all I can say, I've at least got my piece ready on Glass-Steagall. There will be a moment. I'll call on everybody in this room to help us get it through Congress, because it will come. It will come. We will do it.
This is a long one.
Okay, a long one. I'm ready.
I haven't read A Fighting Chance yet, having just
You would never
received-
say that in class. Okay, this is. You would not start with, Professor Warren, I have not read the material, but I just thought we'd. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No one is obligated to have read this.
Having just received my copy of your book.
Okay, fair enough.
But I have read The Two-Income Trap, Why Middle-Class Mothers
God
and
bless,
Fathers
and here I was
Are
making fun of this person. Okay, give him a hard time. I love you. It's okay. You read The Two-Income Trap, one of 8 people who did. So I'm in. I'm in.
And All You're Worth, The Ultimate Money Plan.
That's a good book, too. Yeah.
The question then is, can you list the 2 most important issues that have changed or stayed the same since you wrote those books?
Okay, that's a very interesting and thoughtful question. So the short version for everybody who hasn't read the book, those 2 books. The Two-Income Trap is, gosh, it's 12 years old now, I guess. And the basic thrust of the argument was to say, everyone kept talking about how America's middle class was doing fine, and the way you could tell was that median household income kept going up. And my argument was, and part of what I show in this, is that over the space of a generation, from the 1970s to the early 2000s, which is how I talk about this, the only way that median family income could keep going up was if you sent 2 wage earners into the workforce. That in fact, a fully employed male, adjusted for inflation, was earning less than his dad had earned a generation ago. That was part 1, and part 2 was to talk through the economic pressures on the family so that the core expenses, housing, healthcare, education, transportation, had shot through the roof. Families had cut back on every other possible expenditure. Adjusted for inflation, over a generation, families were spending less on food, including eating out. People don't realize this. Less on clothing, less on appliances. They were actually spending more on alcohol. Less on tobacco. So you saw these differences. So, and the consequence of all this was that by the early 2000s, the 2-income family had more income, but less after they'd paid their insurance, their mortgage payment, and so on. Just the median family. Less cash, almost 0 savings, and a ton more debt than their parents had had a generation ago. And of course, coming out of that, we had a deregulated credit industry that was just going after these families like crazy. Bankruptcy rates were skyrocketing. I mean, just every part of this. And of course, coming out of that was exactly what happened finally in 2008. I thought it was going to happen by about 6, although you should never put years on this. And that was that finally the mortgage, these horrible mortgages that had been pumped throughout the economy, finally just started going off and brought down the whole economy. So, biggest 2 differences, which I think is what they're, and then by the way, All You're Worth, I'll do all the books at once. The quick version, this is the only time, this book is my 10th book. And you should have seen the book party for Secured Transactions, a Systems Approach. Okay, not really. That was a book that people only read if they were assigned it. However, I assigned it to a lot of people, so never slowed me down. All You're Worth was actually a book that was written, all the books I've ever written have really been about, in effect, solving a problem. What it was that, so for me, it was what was happening to America's middle class is what provoked the 2-income trap. And by the way, I should say, I talked about what happened to 1-income families in that, and it's devastating if you go back and look at it. What happens to a woman trying to raise a family on her own? I mean, it's just the The idea behind two-income was they were at least supposed to be doing well, and everyone else was doing worse. But when I wrote that book, it really was the first time I ever went out and talked to people a lot about the book outside a classroom setting. And I kept getting the questions, so what should we do about it? Which, I'm an academic. I mean, I just point out the problems, right? The missiles go up, where they come down is not my department, said Werner von Braun. But what do we do about it? And so I wrote All You're Worth to try to say, if you saw this research and you can't make the policy change, what can you do to try to make your family safer? How can you do it? So that was part of it. So what has changed in the years since then? I think they asked for two. The first one truly is the consumer agency. And I say that by way of saying, we had so many laws on the books to protect consumers. We really did. But nobody who would enforce them. Indeed, the agencies went out of their way to make sure the states didn't enforce them, to make sure that you couldn't bring a lawsuit to enforce them. So we had all of these laws and then all this insulation. And now that's gone. And it fundamentally, I believe, has started to change what this market is like on credit. And that helps a little bit. It helps to move us in the right direction. But having said that, here's the part that has continued to unravel. With the recession the Great Recession of 2008, what I was talking about the underinvestment in building a future has just gotten worse. So state schools, state universities, 3 out of every 4 kids who's in college is in a state university. It used to be the case, 20 years ago, that state universities, the taxpayers, picked up $3 out of $4 of the cost of educating every student who was there. When I was in school, it was even more than that. The idea was, we're all better off if these kids go to school, get an education, or are more productive. It'll help us all. That shifted just around the time of the recession, so that today the states are paying generally $1 in $4. Who pays the other 3? Families, right? We push it back onto the kids, we push it back onto their families. And it's true across the board. We're not making the investments in infrastructure. China is investing 9% of its GDP in infrastructure. They are building a future for their businesses, making it easier and cheaper to be able to do business in China, to make jobs better over time in China. Here in the United States, we're at 2.4% investment in infrastructure. Take a look at the Ryan budget. It just slashes through. Next month, we will literally run out of money in the Highway Trust Fund. That means the potholes will just get bigger. This has never happened in our history. Investments in NIH. I just don't even know how to say this. We invested for decades in science and medical research. We paid and paid and paid to plow ground, to plant seeds, to water those seeds. Some of them grew up, some of them were bad ideas and didn't. We paid and we paid over the years, and now there we are. We've mapped the human genome. We have ideas for how to treat cancer, for how to deal with Alzheimer's, for how to treat diabetes, and yet we won't spend the money to pick the fruit on the trees. We are cutting back and cutting back, adjusted for inflation again. NIH, NSF, we can't build a future that way. And so all of that means that the things I was talking about in the early 2000s, when at least we still had what appeared to be an expanding economy. Families are having to track faster and faster, but at least they have jobs. Now we roll that forward a little over a decade, and the answer is, for a lot of families out there, there's just a lot of kids coming out of school. We haven't built that future. And again, this goes back to what we're doing in Washington. The Republicans in Washington are saying, cut, cut, cut. You can't cut your way to a future. And so I've got one up and one down in terms of the changes over 10 years, but this is the fight we gotta have. Yeah.
The
next question is, can you speak on your feelings on healthcare reform?
Yeah. Okay. So we could talk about a lot of things about healthcare reform, but here's the key thing I talk about on healthcare reform, because I think it's really powerfully important. We need to stop and realize how many good things happened out of the Healthcare Act. Insurance companies, just because you get sick, okay, have a bad diagnosis, a health scare. Insurance companies can't charge you more just because you're a woman. I happen to feel pretty personally attached to that one. Insurance companies have to cover young people on their parents' policies until they're 26. Seniors all get one free visit a year on preventive care. Birth control is made available for free to anybody who wants it. These things matter. These things matter. So look, we can talk all day long about how websites haven't worked, and they haven't, and it's a bad thing, and it's hard to defend. We need to do a better job, but the point is, we need to do a better job, not that we need to do a worse job. So, lots of things we could do. I'm on healthcare. I'm a strong supporter.
What can we do to convince you to run for president?
So listen, I am not running for president. But I want to say something really important here. We've got issues in front of us right now. I mean, literally right now. Just this last week, we had, last week, we had a vote in the United States Senate about whether or not to bring down the interest rate on student loans. I just remind everybody in this room, there's $1.2 trillion outstanding in student loan debt. 40 million Americans are dealing with student loan debt. You can refinance your home mortgage, you can refinance your business loans, you cannot refinance your student loans. We have people, depending on when they graduated, out there with student loans at interest rates of 6%, 8%, just wave when I hit yours, 10%, 12%. There we go, hands higher, right? We've got people with very high interest rate loans, and just so you get the picture of what's happening, when I went to school, I had student loan. It was a subsidized student loan, which meant I had a below market interest rate. And in my particular case, because I taught special needs kids. That was my first job before I did law school. They forgave 15% of my loan every year for teaching. You'll love this, it was called a National Defense Education Loan because it was in the defense of this country that we educate our children. Instead, today, what is the United States government doing to help kids? Cost of college is out of sight, going up every year. It's very much an issue we need to address, but we cannot let it blind us to dealing with the debt that's already out there. We've got to do both. This is a both and, not an either or. What is the United States government doing right now? It's saying to young people, you need to get an education, absolutely. We will lend you the money, and then here's what we expect back from you. We want you to pay the cost of the money. Okay, I get that. We want you to pay the principal. We want you to pay for the bad debt losses. We want you to pay the administrative fees. I'm in. And then we want you collectively to produce tens of billions of dollars in profits to run the United States government. In other words, there's a special tax on kids that says if your parents are rich, this is how much you'll pay for college. If your parents aren't rich, you'll pay that much plus more. Just the student loans from 2007 to 2012, just that little slice of student loans is on target right now to produce $66 billion in profits for the United States government. So, we put forward a bill just week before last week, put forward a bill in the United States Congress to reduce the interest rate on student loans. But those profits are already baked in to the budget. They're baked into all the budgets going forward. So, you either run up the deficit some more or you find a way to pay for it. So, we propose to pay for it the Buffett rule. Stitch up the tax loopholes and say people who are earning more than $1 million every year in adjusted gross income can pay at least at the same rate middle-class families pay. Woo! Now here's the deal. Here's what's happened since we did that. We got every single Democrat voting for that. I want to say, by the way, thank you to Pat Leahy and thank you to Bernie Sanders. They were good. Strong on this. Strong on this. We got every Democrat, every independent, every socialist Democrat, and we got 3 Republicans. Added up, though, that's 58. In a world of filibuster, which is exactly what the Republicans did, the bill stopped. So that's where the bill is. Now, here's the deal. Could you see a clearer choice? As a country, we can spend billions of dollars in protecting every tax loophole for millionaires and billionaires. Or we can take literally, and I mean it literally, exactly those same dollars and use it just to bring down the interest rate on student loans. Actually, they would still make a profit, but it'd just be a real skinny profit instead of the one they're making right now. That's the choice in Washington, in a nutshell. We could do this in 100 variations around it. We could do it around Citizens United and how we fund elections. We could do this around infrastructure. We could do it around NIH. But it's to say there are choices that our government is making right now. And these choices directly affect every American. And more powerfully, they affect our children and our grandchildren because they determine the way this country is going to turn. So I'm going to tell you what I'm up to. I wrote this book. Like I said, I go to the Senate. I go out and talk to people whenever I can. Not about races down the line, about what's happening right now in the United States Senate, what's happening right now in the House of Representatives, and what's going to happen in this country in November of 2014. So I'm going to end this with an ask. And here's my ask. I take it I have to, am I getting the hook on this? I think I am. Kyle said yeah. I thought so. So here's my ask. My ask is this. Get involved. And if you are involved, get more involved. Get involved, and let me give you some ways you can get involved. On student loans in particular, the bill is called Bank on Students. You can Google it. You can go to my website, elizabethwarren.com. You can Google Bank on Students. Sign a petition. You got friends, you're fine in Vermont. You got friends who live somewhere else. You got friends in Texas. You got friends, I'm serious about this. You got friends in Alabama. You got friends in Kentucky. Then get your friends to write their senators, to call their senators. We're going to all be home soon for our summer hiatus. People are out, they're talking to people. Elections are coming up. Ask your friends to stand up in a town hall meeting. Ask them to show up at the office and say, why did you vote to protect loopholes for billionaires instead of helping kids who are trying to get a start in life? Make people answer the questions. Show that there is some consequence when you don't vote on behalf of the people you're supposed to represent. Please get involved. Find a campaign. that you're interested in. Contribute $5 or $10. It's just an investment. It's a part of making your voice heard. All of you, you'll have better ideas, you'll have more ideas, trade ideas, talk to people at the grocery store, hold up signs, do every part of this. Because here's the deal. This is our moment in history. It's not the one we planned. It's not the one we asked for. But this is our moment to decide the direction this country will take. Our moment to say, oh, it's all too complicated, it's too hard, a pox on all their houses in Washington. In which case, the folks who can hire all the lobbyists, the folks who can hire all the lawyers, the folks who can make all the campaign contributions, they win. They walk away with all of it. And our kids are left with less than we had, with a narrower future, with fewer opportunities. Or we can say, as has happened before in history, this is our moment, and we understand that it is up to us to determine how this government moves. And we will do it. They may have the money and the power, but we have our voices, we have our values, and we have our votes. And we're going to make sure that all three of them get heard and reflected in this country. So thank you all for being here today. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That way. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for being up there. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, dear. Thank you.